Doing?
I'm good. Are you?
Good. So glad to have you with us here today. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. I'm just going to
Yeah.
quickly introduce you and then I'll hand over the floor to you if that's all right.
Yeah. No problem.
Okay, great. Can you pronounce your last name for me?
Akadelo.
Oh, I don't know.
Just call it. Just call it Akadelo.
Akhal Delo?
Delo. Yeah.
Delo. Perfect. It's Vincent Akha Delo is a policy intelligence advisor, and you focus on migration, governance, and public perception in emerging economies, and helping organizations anticipate risk and avoid policy failure. And you also have your PhD from Chapman University. So I'm sure that you have so much wisdom and knowledge to share with us. So thank you so much for being here. I'm going to hand it off to you.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me here today. Can you hear me?
Yes, sounds great.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for having me here today. I'm grateful to be here to have opportunity to present this pressing need that have been in my mind because I was in the shoe before I get to this point. So I felt as if we should have actually help others to understand that there's so much that we think we don't have that we actually have that we need to utilize so that we can be able to fit into the workforce. Yeah. So, like the topic said, from research to practice, translating academic skill into credible career in peace building and humanitarian work. Before I came to start get into refugee and migration, I didn't have any idea about that until I got into the field research, which translates into my area of expertise. So that is why I'm here today to help others to navigate such who I am. Here is who I am. I come to this conversation from the background of international study with a focus on migration, policy, and how systems shape real world outcome. Because that is one thing we have to understand. My research has looked closely on refugee resettlement, particularly how policy and experience at community level, not just how they are designed, but how they are shaped, how perspectives shape implementation. Beyond research, my work is increasingly focused on a key question. How do we move from understanding this issue to actual engaging them in real practice? And that is what brought me here today to this conversation. Now, framing the gaps. We have had so much and very important perspective today on peace building and humanitarian work. Idea grounded in research, experience, and deep commitment to global issue. But as I will listen, one question keep pumping in my mind. What happened after all this? Not after the seminar. I'm not talking about after the seminar. But what happened after the degree? What happened after our research? What happened after all the publication? Because we know for sure that when you are going to the labor force, whether humanitarian or whatsoever labor force, they will ask you for number of years of experience, 5 years experience, 3 years experience. And these are people that are just coming out from the college, PhD, master's, first degree, but yet they have to show experience. Because many emerging scholar and practitioner, for many emerging scholar and practitioner, one thing we always find out is that the real challenge is not understanding the problem, but finding credible path to work itself. Because that is one thing we always find out. How do we find credible path to work? There is a gap, not in knowledge, but there is a gap in transition. How do we translate our knowledge into the idea or the experience that we need to carry out our function in the organizational setting? Because that is what the employer is looking for. What I want to do in the next few minutes is simple but critical, to show how academic skill, the very one we often misunderstand or underestimated, can be translated into credible career in peace building and humanitarian work. Now, there is a question I pose here. How many of us have a degree, have completed a degree or research project, and still wonder what comes next in practice? So if you are there, just put it on the chat. I find myself in this situation or have not. And more importantly, why does gap existed? Because we know for sure that degree, when we go to the field, what they are asking for is always almost as if it's not exactly what we are studying in school or what we have passed through experience together, but how. So if you have such a, just put it on the pie chart and indicate. Now, the core problem. The core problem we have is not academic training. Our academic training is strong, but they fail to produce capable individual. The challenge is that skills developed through academic work are often not translated into the form that institutions will recognize or value. The skills exist, but they are not transferable or they are not translatable. That is the problem we find ourselves. As a result, many qualified individuals remain on a margin of practice. So the issue is not competence. The issue is visibility and positioning. We find it difficult to make ourselves visible and position ourselves where we can be employable. Now, what academia actually builds? When we got our degree, what are those things that academia built? One thing we have to understand is that if we look closely, academic training produce far more than theoretical knowledge. Because if you look at here, policy analysis, research design, data interpretation, and stakeholder understanding and communication skill. These are beyond theoretical knowledge, but many of them we don't know how to translate them. It develops analytical thinking, the ability to interpret complex data, engage with diverse perspectives, and communicate structural insight. That is one thing we have to understand. These are not academic abstraction, but they are real field relevant skill that can be translated if actually we know exactly how to extract this data from our research or from our field work. So all you need is, the employer is not going to do it for you. What the employer is expecting is that, will you be able to translate your knowledge into employable skill? And these skills are actually embedded in our academic knowledge, but we just fail to recognize them and to extract them. Now, here is the missing link. Skills are not well articulated. The real gap lies in translation. It's not that the skill is not there, but we fail to be able to translate it into what is useful. Students and graduates often do not articulate their skill in a way that align with practical roles they are applying for or they are desiring for. That is one of the major problems. Outputs are not adaptable. Academic output remain academic format. That is one of the problems. Most of the time, we discover that our academic output will remain in academic format, but that is not what is needed in humanitarian work. We need to be able to translate them into something that is adaptable to real work application. So as a result, their value, most of the time, is called that the value of those graduates are not clearly communicated to practitioner. They fail to be able to express themselves. They fail to be able to bring out the knowledge they have so that the practitioner, the employer can see their output. This is where disconnects often become visible. Many times discover that I remember when I finished my undergraduate and I was finding it difficult to be able to translate my knowledge because when I go to the field, they were asking for 5 years of experience. This is a fresh graduate. How do I demonstrate I have 5 years experience? But we have to understand that during the course of our training, we attended several seminars, at conduct interview, engage with stakeholder, and these are knowledge that we are supposed to be able to translate into adaptable workforce knowledge that is useful. But many times we don't know how to abstract this knowledge. Therefore, we have problem. We get stuck. Now, I have what I call 3-step translation model. If actually you want to be able to translate into workforce. Number one, abstraction. You must be able to identify the skill within your academic work. To move from research to practice, I propose this criteria. One, extraction. Identify the skills that are embedded within your academic work. Every academic work have embedded skill. For example, a student that conduct a research has so much knowledge because you engage with stakeholder, you analyze your data, and you recommend policy. And these are adaptable knowledge that you can actually be transferable to workforce if actually you know how to translate this idea. Second, translation. Converting those skills into practical function. You must be able to convert those skills that you acquire, those skills that you acquire during your training into practical function. Something that can be able to relate to with employer. Positioning. Aligning those functions with real world role and expectation. Now, there is one thing to translate, there's another thing for you to be able to align them properly. How do you align them? These are what most of the problem we find ourselves. This is how academic training become credible professional tool. Now, I use my example here from thesis to practice. How do I translate my thesis into a practice? Because today I become an expert in migration because I base my research on refugee resettlement in New York City. That is how I got myself into that field. Let me briefly illustrate this using my own work of refugee integration. What appear to be academic research can be reframed as practical capability. Policy analysis become input for program design. Now, policy analysis can be framed as your program design. That is what you have to understand. Interview become a stakeholder engagement. Interview. So when you conduct interview, you can frame it as stakeholder engagement. And analysis become program design and monitoring and evaluation capacity. That is what you have to sign. So when you do analysis, you can actually frame that as program design, monitoring and evaluation capability. So the question is not whether the skill exists. The question is whether we are able to recognize and position them more effectively. So when looking at our academic actually contain practical capability. So when we look at our academic, we discover that it contains so much practical capability that we can translate into workforce, whether humanitarian or whatsoever workforce that you intend to go. But many a times students have not been able to understand that what they are doing in class, what they are doing as a research they carry out can actually be framed as a capacity for workforce development. Now, what defines credibility? Credibility in peace building and humanitarian work is not defined by credential alone, because many a time we always make that mistake. Our credential is almost useless, especially in Nigeria, where I come from. Having a credential doesn't speak too much. Even when in US also, it's called that credential is important, but what you know is much more valuable, because knowledge is much more valuable. We value knowledge more than credential. It's not that credential is not is not important, but you must be able to translate it into what is applicable, or what is can be applicable in the workforce. So outside that, it becomes useless. So it emerges from combination of competence. Credibility emerges from the combination of competence, the ability to understand complex issue. Will you be able to understand complex issue? That is one thing. Application, the ability to act on that understanding, and trust, which is built on through consistency and demonstrated input. Now, you have to understand credibility is built upon this. You have to be able to apply the knowledge in real context. The knowledge and skill must be able to apply in a complex issue, which will help you to build trust and consistency and collaboration that will have impact in where you want to work. Here I look at pathway to practice. So how do we begin to bridge this gap? First, you must be able to reframe your academic work in terms of skill and practical value. Whatsoever academic work you engage upon when you are studying, you must be able to reframe them to reflect skill and value that is applicable in real world. Second, you must be able to translate your research into a format that is practicable, which such as policy brief or applied report. Many a time, at the end of our research, we recommend policy or what you call implication. So this can actually be drafted into policy brief that is applicable, that you can show forth to any employer and say, these are what I recommend, or these are what I propose, that can be able to move your organization forward, or that can be able to change the status quo that have been in existence before. So these are what we have to understand. It's a third, by engaging in opportunity that bring us closer to our field. One thing I always tell people is this: wherever you find yourself, try to work in a field that will bridge yourself, that will bridge the ability to manifest in the real world. We have a lot of what we call internship during our training. Where do you want to work? That is one thing we always tell people. I say, where you want to work, we should learn to actually engage on it. Go to that place during your break in school, try to practice, work with them, volunteer. We have a lot of volunteer work that you can do to put yourself into practice, so that you have something to impute into your CV or into your record that will be translated into something that you can show forth as applicable. Engage in a field, in an adjacent field opportunity. Build visibility and network. One thing we also have to understand that you must be able to build a visibility, ensure that your work is seen and understood. Not just understood, but trusted. So what you are doing, can people see it? Will they understand what you are doing? And can they even trust what you are doing and say, oh, trusted and tested and trusted? That is one thing. And there are a lot of platforms where you can offer free training or free service. Like LinkedIn, you can go to LinkedIn and reach out to an organization and say, oh, I have so brief that wants to submit to you. I'm giving it out just for you to implement it and see how it works. And this will help you to build a lot of visibility and trust, because they will have to be understood what you are doing and test it, so that therefore you will be able to build trust. Now, closing insight from knowledge to action. If there is any one thing I will leave with all, it is this. One thing I want to say: the challenge before us is not lack of knowledge. We've already have research framework analysis that explains some of the world's most complex humanitarian peace building problem. The real challenge is whether we can translate what we know into what we can do, because academic training was never meant to be a destination. It was meant to be our toolkit that we needed to position ourselves for what is to come, that can build us, make us to be trusted in a real world. So the question is, it's not what I have studied, but the question is, what can I do with what I know, and how can I shape, how can those things shape those, how can those knowledge help me to shape what I know? So the bridge that we must learn, this is the bridge we must learn to cross in our academy. Not, thank you. Is there any question? Give room for question and answer.
Yeah, any questions from the audience?
I think that this is really an important presentation for a lot of people, because in my own experience, I've come across so many people who strive to have careers in academia without recognizing at times how difficult it is to break into academia. And I think there was a time maybe 30 years ago that getting an academic position was maybe easier, but it isn't so far now. So there's a rude awakening that takes place at a certain point where I'm not going to get a job as an assistant professor or a visiting professor, and I have a PhD, which in some respects may seem to overqualify me for practice work, but not necessarily. And so there's this shift that has to go on in thinking about, okay, I'm looking for work in practice, but I've spent my time working on a dissertation. What does that mean? And I think Vincent raises a kind of a good model of how you take this dissertation knowledge or this thesis knowledge and make it practice oriented, right? I mean, Vincent, have you come across PhDs that are trying to go to academia, or maybe the other way, going from practice back to academia?
Yeah, we have a lot of them. You know, sometimes you see people that have passion for academia. So such people are being driven to academia. Not that they are not practice. They find themselves in practice, but they have passions to be in academia. So you see a lot of them that say, oh, they are practicing, but they want to be in the classroom. So we have people with that passion. But what we are trying to say is this, that whatever field you find yourself is transferable into any practice you can think of.
Right.
So,
right.
Yes, that is it. So whatever field you just find yourself, every knowledge you acquire in academy can be transferable to any field you want.
Yeah, and you know, one of the struggles have always been is that there's a lot of research produced. Okay, there's a lot of peer-reviewed journals, and PhDs are supposed to produce a peer-review journal out of their dissertation or whatever, and then you know, when you get a job in academia, it's used to be, you know, publish or perish type of thing. And one of the challenges is just there's a lot of really important research out there that has not been converted into practice, right? There's a lot of great models out there that people talk about that, I mean, sometimes I feel like there's an excess of research. I think that that's maybe a not so good way of looking at it, but there is, and a deficit in practice for the amount of research that's out there. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, that means I think one of the biggest problem we are trying to correct now is that people don't even understand that the academic work actually contains a model for practice. So
Mm-hmm.
they see it as paper publishing, a field that can be applied by other enterprise, forgetting that this is a knowledge they themselves can convert to something that can make them to be self-employed.
Yeah.
So that is the problem. So we are trying to correct it. Oh, we don't have to be looking for a job, especially, where US, you might be think of looking for a job. But I can tell you, because of this, my work on refugee, I am already trying to register my NGO now to focus
Good.
on migration, because it started from this work in 2003. 2023. That is where it started from. So going to the field, I find out there is so much disconnect, there's so much you can do, and there's so much policy mismatch. And one thing I also find out is that there is so much perception, how perception affects so much policy. The money is there, but there is no effect. So what is the problem? So discover that, oh, there's so much you can convert your thesis to. There's so much you can convert your research to. Even your classwork. Because I remember there was a time we went to, we conduct what we call it, practice. I have to go to a law firm to interview them, and I understand so much practice about law firm. So if I want to apply for a law firm today, I have so much knowledge that I can abstract from. Those are embedded in our academy that people don't actually recognize. But we are trying to open people's eyes that you don't have to look outside for practical knowledge, that you can attract this knowledge from what you have already done and express it as your knowledge. That is, if you are in school for 5 years,
right,
you can actually say that you have practiced for 4 years. So if you can share of, okay, when I was at 200 level, I conducted social research from 300, you extract those knowledge, and they can stand in for the gap you are looking for.
Yeah. So I have a question here. Let me get to some of these questions and observations. One is just posted in international development and peace building. Some practitioners in the field see academics or those as PhDs as pure theorists and are not relevant for their work. And policymakers do not have time to read the books and long research reports that scholars write. How can we bridge this disconnect between those in the field and those in academia to advance peace building and development work?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a great question. One thing I want to touch on is this: for every 500-page thesis, you don't need 500 pages. The policymaker doesn't have time to read through 500 pages. That is the problem. Right. But you, as a researcher, have you been able to extract what is needed? Because as a policymaker, I can't sit down and be reading your thesis for 500 pages. But have you been able to extract your brief and send it to me? This is what I recommend. Just probably a 2-page, a 5-page from all your work. That is the problem. So there are a lot of body of knowledge, but nobody have actually go in to extract what is actually needed. It's not everything that is in thesis that is needful. So every other thing is just a knowledge. But what is the core knowledge that you are trying to pass across? So, but the policymaker doesn't have time to sit down with that. That is the problem.
And I think that requires recognition that the researcher has to be able to write it in 2 pages, right?
Yeah.
Has to be able to synthesize in a way that makes sense. I mean, when I send students to read academic journals as a professor, I'm often fearful, especially master's degree students who are not used to doing that they just get lost. Like there's the setup and then there's a conclusion, and the middle of it is just so deep that it's just lost on them. And even though there might be a synopsis in the beginning and there might be all of that, I still feel like sometimes we don't recognize the different levels of understanding in a field, Yeah.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah. Chris clicked on something called Bridging the Gap Project, a New Era workshop. I'll have to take a look at that. Let me see what else. Somebody mentioned about paywalls, which I think is very interesting also, is that if I want to go to a journal, an academic journal, and I want students to read it, I've got to make sure there's no paywall, right? I mean, if they belong to, if they're a member of George Mason University, that's usually there's no paywall and so forth. So one of the challenges, one of the challenges is things have changed, right? Overall, for instance, I'll show you it. I don't think I have it with me. I think I have it in my car, but there's a book that I wrote a chapter in that was edited by the dean at the Carter School, and it was on humanitarian practices. No one's going to buy the book because the book is $250. Okay, and a library might buy the book, but a library might not even buy the book. And there's lots of really good. It's an academic book. There's lots of really good academic in there, but I don't think people are going to read the book if they can't access it in order to apply it. So, and I think often the research field does itself a disservice by making things non-accessible to the practice field. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
Let's see what else is in here. In terms of paywall, which more and more journals are doing, you can always present a snippet or on LinkedIn or similar sites to share the main ideas. Right, exactly. You can do that, Heather. Good point.